my name is Margaret Teddy. Can I help you with this? Education philosophy school on lecture?
Well, I prefer reading over rhetoric.
Absolutely. Certainly.
So you can't see
Basically. Okay, perfect. We'll do. All right. So I'm an alumni manager. So I've done values before the calls as well. I am currently at NTSU. I'm studying international relations. As far as preferences for the round, one of the things that really helps me is to really organize, have your arguments, and lead your arguments. It's not going to be a full issue for me, but it really helps me follow the arguments and push them back.
I agree with that for sure. I'm a mom, I'm a mom.
Okay.
I did go to college, and I abhor definitions to me. But I don't hold it against you. I think this res falls way more. That's why I say that this res has.
All right, for clarification, second for this, formal education. One, second that. First. Oh, first, I'm sorry, great. All right, okay. Well, good then? Yes, okay, all my judges. Yeah, let's go ahead and begin. Reason obeys itself. Ignorance submits to what is dictated to it. Thomas Paine, The Rights of Man. Judge Thomas Paine was justified in his fear of the lack of critical thinking in his generation, and for that reason I stand resolved in formal education of liberal arts ought to be valued above practical skills. And I shall begin the round by going over some housekeeping items, the first of which is definitions. Formal education is organized education guided by a formal curriculum, which leads to formally recognized credentials. Practical skills is professional or vocational skills intended for a specific job. Now, the definition of liberal arts, due to common abuse and misinterpretation, deserves an entire resolutional analysis all to itself, which you can simply tag as clarifying liberal arts. Again, clarifying liberal arts. Now, allow me to show you the common opinions on the meaning of liberal arts amongst the majority. One of the best ways to demonstrate this incorrect view is to read, well, the Urban Dictionary definition, which states the art of being liberal, the pursuit of both education and poverty at the same time. Now, the true definition of liberal arts does not mean liberal thought or fluffy, non-applicable random studies. Rather, according to Merriam-Webster, is college or university studies intended to provide chiefly general knowledge and to develop general intellectual capacities as reason and judgment, as opposed to professional or vocational skills. Ultimately, we can say that liberal arts actually provides general knowledge and intellectual stimulation through its classes. This is paramount to the round to comprehend liberal arts in its true form as opposed to the general public's misinterpretation. Now we can finally start getting to the meaty part of my case, starting with my value of societal progress. Again, the highest thing I'll be upholding in today's debate round will be societal progress, which is defined as advancements of major conditions of societies. And the criteria or way I will be achieving this value in today's debate round will be through critical thinking. Again, my criteria for today's debate round is critical thinking, which is defined as actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, or evaluating information gathered from observation, experience, reflection, etc. as a guide to belief and action. Essentially, it means the ability to accurately dissect and understand information. This leads me to my first contention. Contention 1, valuing liberal arts promotes critical thinking. Again, my first argument is that valuing liberal arts promotes critical thinking. Being taught the various theories provided by liberal arts trains the mind. It's not simply knowledge that someone who studies liberal arts gains, although they get that too. They actually gain the ability to learn and to interact with other human beings. Dr. Richard Sergeson says that liberal arts provides, quote, analytical and knowledge-building skills, evaluative and critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, effective oral and written communication skills, critical and reflective reading skills, problem-solving and pattern intelligence skills, end quote. How ironic that liberal arts provides so many applicable skills in today's debate round. In essence, it makes you much smarter, and this conclusion is supported by a vast number of experts. It is common knowledge among educators that liberal arts leads to a sharpened mind, which contains the skill of critical thinking. If any further evidence or quotes are needed from my opponent, you can ask for that cross-examination, and I can provide those. My second contention is that critical thinking promotes societal progress. Again, critical thinking promotes societal progress. I have 3 subpoints under this second contention, the first of which is job skills. Again, you can simply tag this one as job skills. According to a study from the AACU, nearly all the employers that they surveyed, 92% of them agreed that a candidate's demonstrating capacity to think critically, communicate clearly, and and solve complex problems is more important than their undergraduate major. And what we can observe from this is that most employers will actually hire based on that critical skill of critical thinking. The second subpoint is individual growth. Again, individual growth. Now, if every individual was better on a personal level, then society would obviously benefit and progress. Liberal arts provides is defined by its ability to provide awareness of moral, aesthetic, and spiritual issues inherent in life and society, according to Dr. Meyer, as well as 7 other necessary aspects of learning. Liberal arts leads to better ethical decisions by providing you with a broader view and increasing your worldview and bettering, and thereby increasing not only your own quality of life, but also progressing society itself. This leads me to my final subpoint, social and moral progressions. Again, social and moral progressions. Studies show that more and more college students graduating prefer to have a strong financial footing than to have a good philosophy of life. A study showed that people, whenever they graduate from college, are steadily actually increasing, saying that whenever they had to choose between what 2 things they wanted to get from college, either a good financial footing or a good philosophy of life, they would choose a strong financial footing, and it is getting worse and worse. Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, and love, these are what we stay alive for. John Keats, Dead Poets Society. Today, the lack of moral, philosophical understanding, literacy, and theology is voiding Americans with a purpose in their life, and therefore they are not susceptible to good social change and will certainly not advocate for it. My application of this you can tag is Dr. King. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received an undergraduate in divinity and a PhD in systematic theology, a most liberal arts education if I have ever heard one. He eventually progressed American law and thinking, leading to the revolution against racism. His ability to use rhetoric, critical thinking, understanding of other people, and spiritual awareness led to perhaps the greatest social reform in American history. To progress society, you must have citizens who have a foundation and the skill of critical thinking. And for that reason, I ask that you vote for liberal arts. Thank you for today's debate. Thank you so much. I also open for any questions.
Congratulations, Mark, on breaking NITOC.
Thank you. Congratulations to you as well.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Let's get into your case now. First, we do value of societal progress. If I caught your definition correctly, it's pretty much advancing major parts of society.
That is correct. I'm defining societal progress as something that's always good and benefit in society.
Right, fair enough. Now, would you agree that this progress would include the practical skills needed to be able to, say, build a city?
Well, I think that practical skills is absolutely necessary. However, what we're looking at today is which one is more valuable in today's debate around the critical thinking. So that's what I'm looking at.
Okay, I'll talk more about that later. Let's get to your first contention. Liberal arts promotes critical thinking. Now, how exactly does liberal arts promote critical thinking?
There's multiple ways that it does it. There's classes such as history. In that particular case, what you can do is look back at history and learn from the mistakes of the people who made them, and then be able to progress societies through that. There are many other ways which it does. They can present multiple philosophical ideologies and beliefs.
Okay, but how does simply reading about the past actually promote somebody to be able to think on their own?
I think that being able to learn and study from multiple areas which would be able to actually provide you with that skill of critical thinking, and also brought up evidence under this course. So I think that this is strongly upheld in today's society.
Okay, so just being able to read history, maybe both in your downtime and also in class, that would help promote critical thinking.
I think that in colleges, which is specifically probably what we're going to be talking about most of today, what we can look at is that broad education is actually going to allow you to gain critical thinking. So it's not just history, but a combination of all of them.
Right, but sorry, I was just using it as an example. Generally speaking, when you are reading history, you're gaining critical thinking. And then, and also reading history can't only happen in formal education. You can have it outside of formal education, right?
Of course, but practical skills can as well. So yeah, that would be a non.
Right. Okay. Going down to your second contention now, critical thinking promotes societal progress. Now you brought up your first point of job skills, where 90% of the of employers polled or people polled wanted liberal arts.
They actually wanted critical thinking and all of the skills that liberal arts gains.
Okay.
Gives you. So yeah, that would be a study also.
Okay, critical thinking, thank you. Now, individual growth, you were talking about how critical thinking promotes individual growth. How exactly does it do that?
Well, as I've already stated, if you have critical thinking, which is what the second condition is built on, is it liberal arts does need critical thinking, that critical thinking will actually help you in your personal life as well as in your academic career.
Okay, so, all right, thank you. Now, going down to the application of Dr. Martin Luther King, what exactly does this have on bearing on the program?
Well, as I mentioned, he actually had a degree in very strong liberal arts, and with that skill of critical thinking and communication, as well as other things I brought up, he was able to lead the society to progress in his day.
Now, would you agree that he needed the skills to be able to organize his movement?
I think that was under his critical thinking that he actually gained.
I thank you. I'm out of time. Starting at your time. Management Training Academy states that education is good, but it is useless if you cannot apply what you have learned to solve everyday living issues. It's because I believe that we must be able to apply our knowledge to solve the largest threats facing the world today is the reason why I urge you to vote negative. My value for this round, well actually before I get to my value, let's do a resolutional analysis, which you can tag as approaches to education. Approaches to education. There are many different types of classes that could be considered both a liberal arts and a practical skill. Take math, for example. If you take math for general knowledge, then you can get a liberal arts education. But if a student is planning on being an engineer, then math would be considered a practical skill. So the conclusion we can take from this is that the end result of education is determined by your goals for education. In other words, you get what you put into it. Now, my value for this round is that of reducing poverty. Operationally defined as globally reducing the number of people living under $10 a day without access to basic needs. And I have two value links or reasons why reducing poverty should be the highest value in today's debate room. You can tag my first reason as the highest threat. The highest threat. The simple fact is that 80% of the world lives on less than $10 a day. And according to UNICEF, an estimated 22,000 children are dying of poverty each and every day. Because of poverty affects billions of people around the globe and threatens the lives of millions, is the reason why poverty is the largest threat facing the world today. Now, my second reason to value reducing poverty can be tagged as generational poverty. Generational poverty. Many of the poor today have been poor their entire life, and not just themselves, but their parents and their grandparents before them. This cycle of poverty only grows stronger with unemployment and unhealthy living conditions. The only way to be able to break this cycle is for the poor to gain the skills necessary to become self-sustaining and pull themselves out of poverty. It's my position in this round that it's not liberal arts that best reduces poverty, but through practical skills education. Let's take a look at this in my first contention, which you can tag as liberal arts limits poverty reduction. Liberal arts limits poverty reduction. Because a liberal arts education is focused on the training of the mind to think, it doesn't dwell on the practical instruction needed in jobs today. Author Dan Schwab wrote that a liberal arts major is only a stepping stone to snagging a job. Indeed, there's a global trend of unemployment among college graduates, where only 2% of polled companies actually actively look for liberal arts educations. Jobs are a must-have, especially when people are mired in poverty. You can see the gap between liberal arts and jobs in the application of Ghana. Like many other countries in Africa, Ghana is experiencing high youth unemployment and a stumbling economy. According to the Ministry of Manpower, Youth and Unemployment, the highest cause of youth unemployment in Ghana is the inadequate planning for integration into vocational jobs and training through education. As a result, their education has no link to the economy, with only 40% of college graduates actually getting a job. With the poverty rate near 30%, Ghana is just one of many examples where practical skills are desperately needed to reduce poverty. Now that was all about liberal arts. Let's take a look at practical skills in my second contention, which you can tag as practical skills reduce poverty. Practical skills reduce poverty. Unlike liberal arts, which focuses on the propagation of general knowledge and thinking, practical skills focuses on the training of students to succeed in their jobs and become capable workers. This is vital for the impoverished today because so many are either unemployed or underemployed with a job that cannot sustain them. You can see this in the application of Nigeria, where practical skills actually reduce poverty. For years now, Nigeria has been experiencing worsening unemployment and pervasive poverty amongst its citizens. A study was conducted by the International Journal for Learning, where the volunteers received 6 months of formal vocational training, including welding, plumbing, small-scale farming, and many others. And after the training period, the volunteers were revisited a year later, and almost all of them had markedly improved their jobs and subsequent incomes. To quote the study, it was concluded that formal vocational training is effective in skill acquisition, which in turn helps in alleviating poverty. It's clear that practical skills are the best way to empower people to pull themselves out of poverty, especially within developing countries. With this idea that poverty is the highest threat that's facing the world today, let's take a look at my opponent's case. First, with the value of societal progress. Two main responses. My first response is that of similar. Reducing poverty is similar in societal progress in that we're trying to advance society to a better state. However, my second response, though, is that poverty is the highest threat. Poverty is the highest threat. And you can simply cross-apply my first valuing that of the highest threat to this second response here, because poverty is the highest threat, and that's how we can best achieve societal progress, because 80% of the world is in desperate poverty. Going down to the first contention, liberal arts promotes critical thinking. Two main responses here. My first one is liberal arts can't train critical thinking. Liberal arts can't train critical thinking. My opponent was talking about how liberal arts does promote critical thinking, but you don't learn that through education, through sitting in a class with a teacher droning on and on about the French Revolution. Where you learn critical thinking is by actually doing the thinking on your own and not having someone else feed you that information. You learn critical thinking on your own and not simply in a classroom. My second response is we can learn outside. We can learn critical thinking outside of formal education, meaning that liberal arts is not necessary to promote critical thinking. Now jumping down to my opponent's second contention, overall response to his contention is need application to progress. Need application to progress. And this is for the simple idea that yes, I believe that we do need to have some general knowledge about the world around us, but that knowledge is useless. It's only potential unless we turn that potential into a reality through the application of knowledge, and that's done best through practical skills. And now I want to look at each one of his subpoints individually. His first subpoint was job skills. My response is practical skills was a prerequisite. Practical skills was a prerequisite. Yes, liberal arts might have been wanted by many of the students, but practical skills is still a prerequisite. You need to be able to have the technical training to be able to have a job in the first place. Second response, individual growth. My response is practical skills enriches. Practical skills isn't just some humdrum education where you aren't learning much. It's actually enriching your life. Third and final response to his third point is practical skills can think on their own. And it's because of all these reasons I strongly urge a negative balance. Thank you.
of all, the most important question, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you doing?
You're doing quite well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed your case, just have a couple of quick questions for you, great? Okay, first of all, let's go over your resolutional analysis. You talked about approaches to education, correct? And your logic under this was that we have to look at how people, whenever they take their education, what they're trying to achieve in the future. That was kind of what your point was?
Yes.
Okay, you would agree that you can change that midway through your education in college, correct?
Yeah, sure. You
Okay.
can.
Perfect. You also did agree to all of my definitions, correct?
Yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and talk about your value reducing value. Now, under addressing my value set of arguments, first of all, it's simple, right?
There it is.
I would agree to that, but I would also say that you would agree that morality is also an issue that can be progressed in societal progression, but not under reducing value, correct?
You can actually promote both at the exact same time. I don't think.
Well, of course, okay, but you would agree that you don't socially or morally progress under reducing poverty necessarily, but societal progress includes socially and moral progress.
Well, I believe it is moral to be able to help your fellow man if you can.
Of
So
course.
it would be moral to reduce poverty.
Of course, yeah, that's always my point, but I'll get to that.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine. Let's go ahead and talk about, you would agree that we are discussing colleges basically, not mostly formal education.
Yeah, sure, to a general extent.
Okay,
Yes.
and we talked a lot about impoverished nations, but we're also talking about first world nations, correct?
Yes, but they are a minority within the world.
Okay, interesting. Let's go ahead and look at your application of Ghana and a couple of other applications. I think about Nigeria as well. You would agree that one of the main problems in these countries and in impoverished nations around the world is that they have poor formal education, period, or that they have no education at all,
Well,
correct?
in the specific application of Ghana, they do actually have a very established educational system of primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. So,
Okay, and in your application of Nigeria, do you have any, what was that point under that particular application?
I was talking about how there was a study done in Nigeria, and people were trained in practical skills, and that benefited them immensely. And so it can also help them.
Okay, great. You would agree also that in these developing countries that critical thinking is necessary to actually be able to progress the societies in groups, correct?
Oh, I'm sure you do need some critical thinking to a certain extent, but the very first priority is to get them out of poverty because they're not being able to look ahead to the next day, but simply survive from day to day.
Okay, interesting. Against my sub-point, my second contingent, we're jumping around a little bit. I apologize for that, but you would agree that whenever you address these practical skills of riches, but it doesn't enrich you personally. You would agree to that?
Well, it definitely would. You have a sense of success and many other things as well that comes with practical skills.
Okay, and finally, you would also agree that practical skills can be learned outside of formal education, just like the words. Correct?
Yeah, sure, but there are several types of practical skills that need to be taught within the classroom and within a trained instructor.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I have no further questions.
Okay, great.
All right, Mark, you ready? Mr. Starfish? Mr. Byron? Did I get that right? Okay, perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and begin with performance. Last year, I went on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic, and in this mission trip, I got to experience firsthand poverty and what that means in particular countries such as the Dominican Republic. And in it, I found that, generally speaking, why people did not grow economically and why they did not reduce the poverty was because they lacked the skill of critical thinking. And this is part of their culture that they are not able to say. For instance, whenever they're looking forward ahead, the TVs always go out and the hot water always goes up. It's always fluctuating. And the reason is that they don't see things in long-term perspective. They only see things in short-term perspective. And that can be solved by having the skill of critical thinking. And it is not necessarily practical skills which are needed in those countries. Because, for instance, in the Dominican Republic, the people, generally speaking, skip out on high school and they fail out. Because the high school only lasts for about 2 hours every day, and they get a terrible education. So instead, they drop out and they get trained in practical skills. In, for instance, growing up and actually taking on their father's tienda, which is a shop. And that's how they live their lives, and they can never progress out of poverty because A, they do not have the skill of critical thinking, and B, they drop out of education. But ultimately, because these nations, the reason why they're impoverished is because they have poor education or no education, and not because they focus on liberal arts. I still stand in affirmation of today's resolution, and I believe the liberal arts would be a great way to solve these issues. Against his resolutional analysis, he talked about approaches to education. I have 2 responses. First of all, education itself. My response to this is education itself. When you look at the education itself, simply because my second response is that they can change their goals. Again, they can change their goals. College students can change their goals and typically do about halfway through whenever they're getting their degrees. And so it's necessary to look at the actual education itself and not just what they're planning on doing at some particular point, which oftentimes is not clear. Let's go ahead and look at his value. And you can cross-apply my addressable of his value to his addressable of my value. We're just discussing the values right now. The first one you can tag is moral issues. Again, moral issues. Reducing poverty does not actually necessarily include solving moral issues, but societal progress encompasses this. So this is one reason to prefer my value. The second one is no education. Again, no education. And those countries that generally have no education, which is the problem, not that they don't have practical skills, and under that you can tag application of the Dominican Republic. Again, application of the Dominican Republic. The third is critical thinking is necessary. This also follows through the application I brought up in my introduction. With that being said, I think we can see at the end of the day, liberal arts not only best reduces poverty, but also best achieves societal progress. Now, the other issue is that reducing poverty is only for impoverished nations. Again, only focuses on impoverished nations. But societal progress actually helps impoverished nations and first world nations because it also deals with social issues. So that's why you should prefer my value to societal progress today. Let's go look at this first contention. Liberal arts limits poverty reduction. I have one response to this. Critical thinking is necessary. Again, critical thinking is necessary. Under the talking about how practical skills reduces poverty, I would like to say that sure, practical skills reduces poverty, just like liberal arts does, and education would also reduce poverty. But ultimately, in many cases, in these impoverished nations he discusses, practical skills are abundant, but critical thinking is lacking. Let's go ahead and look at his addressal of my first contention. So liberal arts can't train critical thinking. Our response is yes, it can train critical thinking. This is supported, as I mentioned before, by a vast number of experts in education, and it is actually trained by learning thinking broadly on any education. And then he also said that you can learn outside, but this is not unique because you can learn practical skills outside as well. Ultimately, I think we see today that because liberal arts is critical thinking, and critical thinking obviously progresses society both in increasing the economy as well as increasing social and moral issues, that I still stand in affirmation in this discussion. Thank you so much.
Right, starting your prep time, I have 2 minutes remaining. no long-term perspective. And this is very true. Many people in developing countries don't have a long-term perspective. And this is because they are so poor that they are focused on survival every single day. When they are barely living on just a few dollars a day of income simply from banking on the streets, you can't have a long-term perspective because you are so focused on the immediate term. And this is why they need to have practical skills, so they can get themselves out of poverty and put themselves into prosperity, give them a position to be able to stand off of. And it's for this reason that I urge a negative thought. I'd like to go down to my case. First, with the resolutional analysis, he had two main responses. I just want to respond to both of them and say that merely what you get out of it. Merely what you get out of it. I wasn't trying, and I was merely saying that the focus of your education will determine your type of education, and it kind of is irrelevant to what, if you change focus halfway through or not, because then that focus will then determine your end goal. And so this really doesn't have much of a bearing on the debate round. I just wanted to eliminate the gray area between with subjects like that. Now going down into my first contention, he had one main response, and that critical thinking is necessary. Now I do totally agree, critical thinking and problem solving are great things to have. However, my response is you can learn on the side. You can learn it on the side. This is for the simple fact that once you come home from your practical skills job, you can sit on the couch and read history, read philosophy, read about mathematics if you so choose. It's liberal arts can be studied on the side, and therefore you can gain critical thinking through it. What this means is that you don't have to go to an expensive liberal arts college, but simply go to a practical skills college so that you can then gain a good job and also have critical thinking as a positive bonus on the side. My opponent didn't have any direct response to my second contention, so I want to jump up into my opponent's case now with the value of societal progress. He had three main responses. I want to try and respond to them individually here. His first response was that of moral issues. You get more moral issues with societal progress. My response is moral to reduce poverty. It's moral to reduce poverty. And I said this in cross-examination. I want to reiterate how helping your common man is a moral thing to do, and so you are actually getting a moral result from valuing reducing poverty. And also my second response here is that you can study morality later. You can have morality later. After you get yourself out of poverty and have a stable job and a stable house, then that means you can actually focus on morality later. But the practical skills are the prerequisite to all of this. We need to first value practical skills so that we can stop focusing on poverty and then start focusing on the higher things and progress society in the end. Going down to a second response, he said no education. My response is no impact to liberal arts. No impact to liberal arts. If a country doesn't have any type of formal education, then this debate doesn't really apply to that because they have no formal education to begin with. And so this means that the application of the Dominican holds very little weight within this debate round. Going down to his third response, critical thinking is necessary. I want to cross-apply my response that we can learn it on the side to right here, again reiterating that practical skills does not eliminate the possibility for you to learn critical thinking. Now he brought up a response to to his first contention. I brought up the idea about how liberal arts cannot train critical thinking, and he simply said yes, he can train critical thinking with liberal arts. However, my response is that critical thinking outside of formal education. Again, I want to say that because critical thinking, the way you learn critical thinking is to think on your own and not simply think the same thought patterns that your teacher or your instructor is within a class. And so this means that you have to do it on your own and outside of formal education. The impact of this is that you actually can learn critical thinking through practical skills because you don't have to be in a liberal arts class to gain critical thinking in the first place. And my opponent didn't have enough time to respond to the second contention, so I want to go into some voting issues now. My first voting issue you can tag as liberal arts does not reduce poverty. Liberal arts does not reduce poverty. And I want to point you back to my application of Ghana, which you didn't have any direct response to. How they were training people within the liberal arts education, but poverty is only increasing in Ghana. They are not seeing any decrease in poverty. In fact, the people of Ghana who have a liberal arts education are not easily able to find a job, whereas practical skills would give them a job very much readily. And now, the reason why liberal arts can't reduce poverty is because it is focused on general knowledge. General knowledge, again, might be a good thing, but you need to be able to apply that knowledge, and that's where practical skills comes in. That's where you can actually turn the potential of an idea into the reality of physical reality. Now, I want to go into my second and final voting issue. That is practical skills reduces poverty. Practical skills reduces poverty. And I'd like to point you back to the application of Nigeria in this studies showing that people were trained in the practical skill and vocational training skills, and then they reaped huge benefits from that training just over a 6-month period. This happens very fast, and the people who are in dire poverty can help themselves and get themselves out of poverty in a very quick fashion. And this is for this reason, that practical skills gives them the tools and the training to be able to actually hold a job and to be able to have a successful life overall. Now looking at this round in a big picture scenario, there's the main contention of practical skills versus liberal arts. And I would urge you to vote for the negative because practical skills is the only way to best reduce poverty and that liberal arts can't. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Fisher, Mr. Myrie, and finally, Ms. Sneed. Okay, let's go ahead and his final speech. All right, it's because of my opponent's discussion in his introduction that I still stand resolved in affirmation of today's resolution. Under his last introduction, he talked about the Dominican Republic and carried it through in his last speech. However, he said that we need to look at the Dominican Republic immediacy because they need to get past poverty before they get into liberal arts. That was essentially his main point. However, this is the same mistake that they've been making for decades, and it is why they're still in poverty, because they do not uphold critical thinking or liberal arts, and instead only uphold practical skills. And that is the issue, and that is why they cannot progress their society. And ultimately, this is the point that I was making with this example, and it still flows to the affirmative side. Let's go ahead and look at some of his arguments and really wrap it up into a few voting issues. He talked a little bit about how you can have critical thinking outside of education, and of course, but this is a non-unique argument. Again, non-unique, because practical skills can also be taught outside of education. And I'll get to the impact of that a little later on in my speech. But right now, just remember that it's still non-unique. Against my first contention, when I said that liberal arts is critical thinking, he responded to that not by saying, and not by delinking it, but instead by saying critical thinking can be learned outside of formal education. But that does not mean that liberal arts doesn't equal critical thinking. Liberal arts equals critical thinking, even if you can sometimes get it outside of education. So this argument does not hold any longer. Let's go and look at some more arguments he brought up. He talked a little bit about, he said in his last speech, I think I can clarify this, he said liberal arts colleges or practical skills colleges. We're not talking about just liberal arts colleges and just vocational colleges, but classes within normal colleges. Let's go ahead and look at some of his voting issues. The first one is liberal arts doesn't reduce poverty. And our response to this is yes, critical thinking reduces poverty. And since my first contention still stands that liberal arts equals critical thinking, at the end of the day, if you agree with the fact that critical thinking reduces poverty, then you should vote for the affirmative. With that being said, we can go ahead and move into a few voting issues. The first of which is values. Again, values. In today's debate round, the impact of the values is that while his doesn't include poverty, it only focuses on impoverished nations, and it has nothing to do with first world nations. Whereas my value has to do with first world nations and impoverished nations, as well as the fact that it includes social and moral issues. So again, the impact of this is social issues. My second voting issue is that impoverished countries need critical thinking. Again, impoverished countries need critical thinking. I've been talking about that in my rhetoric. And then my third voting issue is that liberal arts leads to critical thinking. And this has been not well addressed in today's debate round, and I believe still stands from the evidence I brought up within as well as the logic. Now, for my final voting issue is that individual and social improvement. Again, individual and social improvement. Now, wrapping it all up, we've seen that most of the arguments made by the negative are non-unique. So they're just about the same, except for one unique point, and that is the individuals are progressed better by the affirmative. And for that reason alone, I ask you to vote for the affirmative. Thank you so much.